Thanks very much. I just want to raise one or two things myself. Dr. Muldoon, first of all, I know it's been said, but genuinely we appreciate you coming in, and this report and the work in general. I've always found a very proactive approach from the Children's Ombudsman's Office, and it's very much needed, because unfortunately I find, and I'm sure a lot of people will agree, it seems like if you're a child with additional needs that you're nearly a second-class citizen, in terms of it's acceptable to wait for a school place, it's acceptable to have to wait for resource hours, or for, especially in rural areas, transport. Everything is a battle, and parents will say that. And then you have situations where, you know, some parents may be able to take on that battle, but not every parent can. And I think there's a small reference to that in your report, that, you know, if you have maybe the capabilities of putting in a complaint and an appeal, but people do get worn down by that, and it seems like it's paperwork after paperwork. So I suppose we welcome this report, even though it's difficult reading, in the sense that it's terrible to think that in 2020 this is where children with additional needs are, but it also does need to be highlighted and it does need to be addressed. So in that regard, it's welcome. I just wanted to ask you again in relation to, there's two kind of points I want to raise. In relation to the HICWA comment that you made earlier, did they give any reason in that letter as to why? And maybe you can't go into that, and I respect that if you can't, but it just seems, again, there's another example of second-class citizens, you know, children with additional needs, that straight away it's not going to be considered. That's one thing I wanted to ask. And the other thing is, on page 3, I think, of your opening statement, where you say the amendment of section 18 to expand the powers of the Disability Appeals Officer to provide compensation as a remedy for breaches under the Act. I'm wondering, are we going to have to get to that stage really before we see any real progress? Because at the end of the day, it's money. It's when you have to pay out money that people actually, unfortunately, sit up and pay attention, and it shouldn't have to get to that stage, but it would seem like it would. And I can think of so many people that could potentially, you know, fall into that category if that was the case. I just wanted to see, what you think about that. And I suppose just finally to make the point that, you know, we all get so many representations from parents who are just heartbroken trying to get an assessment of need, trying to get occupational therapy, speech and language, ASD class places. It's overwhelming, really. And I just kind of want to thank the members for their contributions today. A lot of important points were touched in relation to housing. I thought that was an excellent point, because we often have a battle with the local authorities around children with autism. You know, there mightn't be, you know, a need for a wheelchair ramp or something, but children need space, and they need, you know, maybe their own room, or, you know, I can't think of the word of it now, but basically kind of a breakout room, or a room where yeah, I know there's a name, but I can't think of it. But, you know, that is just as important, and sometimes that's dismissed by local authorities. So I suppose I think it's great that we had the opportunity to raise these things today, but my specific two questions, I suppose, are around, if you can, the HICWA letter, and the other one then just around, you know, are we going to, I think we will have to get to a stage where there is a financial compensation before we actually see changes, and just what your kind of opinion on that is. Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and again, thank you for hosting this meeting and inviting us. Just I'll look at the financial penalty, and I'll hand you over to a colleague then in relation to HICWA. The financial penalty, again, for me, that I even struggled with putting it into the recommendations, because I felt it was such a draconian, old-fashioned way of doing things, that you have to use a stick to get some sort of compliance and moving forward. But certainly, if that's the way we have to do it, we find that we're putting penalties of X number of million every year, instead of diverting that penalties to, or those millions to making the system work. I think that's fine if that's what we need to do for a certain period of time. But again, it's a shame that we have to even think that way. You know, I think from our point of view, we should be well past. We should be progressive. We should be future thinking. We should be future proofing these systems. We should be. It should be no question as to whether the child will get what they need and get it in the time that's already on the legislative books. instead of, as I said before, instead of spending money to fight parents who go to the High Court just to get an assessment need in the time that the law says it should do, we should be diverting that money to creating resources and funding those sort of resources. So from my point of view, the financial penalty, if it works, I'd be delighted. And it'd be a shame that it does work, but anything that makes this, that moves things forward and makes it less intractable would be a positive. I'll hand you over to my colleague, Dr. McCauley, then in relation to the HICWA, just give you an outline on that.
Thanks.
Thank you. Just in relation to the HICWA standards, our understanding is that the principal reason why the standards aren't going to be developed, or new standards aren't going to be developed, is primarily related to the capacity and resources available to HICWA. They can obviously speak for their own process, but they have a prioritisation process in terms of deciding which types of new standards to develop and when to do so. And consideration was given to our suggestion that new standards should be developed in relation to assessment of need in the context of that process. I suppose one of the issues I'd say in relation to that is that, as you'll be familiar, there are existing standards that have been in existence since 2007, but there seems to be a broad consensus that the standards are outdated, that they're too generalised, that they're not aligned with HICWA's current methodology for standards, and that in some cases they're factually inaccurate. The difficulty we have is that they're the only standards we have. So despite their flaws, they're what we've got, and they can't be retired, as we understand it, until new standards are put in place. So we're in a funny situation, really, and in a sense what it comes down to, I think, is around the importance of standards. I mean, standards are there to do various things, but one of the very important things they do, I think, is establish clarity around what's expected. So services know what they're expected to do, and families, parents and children know what they're entitled to expect from services. So it's a real problem that in the sense that there aren't going to be new standards developed, allowing that the existing standards are widely regarded as deficient.
Okay, thanks very much.